He stopped short on the front step when he saw the light on inside a house he hadn't seen lit in nearly a year. And for a split second his heart did something painful and hopeful at the same time, like it remembered how to beat for someone who wasn't supposed to be there anymore. The suitcase slipped slightly in his hand as he stared through the window, seeing shadows move where silence had lived for months, and a thought crept in that made his chest tighten. What if you came home, bone-tired and hollow, expecting only your own loneliness, and found proof that life had moved on without asking your permission? Nathan Cole had left for 12 months to work pipeline jobs across the Midwest. Chasing overtime and distance after grief made his own walls feel like they were closing in. The small house in rural Pennsylvania had been his brother Mark's place, then briefly his own responsibility after the accident on an icy interstate took Mark and his wife within minutes of each other. Nathan hadn't known how to exist inside rooms full of their laughter, so he locked the doors, shut off the lights, and told himself leaving was survival, not abandonment. Now he stood there in worn boots and a creased jacket, wondering if the universe was punishing him for running. Inside the doorway stood a woman he did not recognize, her posture rigid with exhaustion rather than defiance, holding a baby against her chest, while a little girl hovered close to her leg like she was afraid of the floor itself. The woman's eyes were rimmed with something heavier than fear, and the children looked like they'd learned too early how to read adults' faces for danger. Nathan felt anger flash first, then confusion, then something like shame, because beneath it all was the realization that someone else had needed shelter badly enough to claim what he had left empty. The woman's name was Sarah Whitaker, and she was a widow in a way that didn't feel poetic or tragic, just brutal and unfinished. Her husband, Thomas, had died of a sudden aneurysm while driving home from a night shift at a warehouse outside Pittsburgh, leaving her with a newborn son named Caleb and a 4-year-old daughter named Anna, a stack of medical bills, and a landlord who didn't care that grief doesn't pay rent. She had come to the house through a church friend who knew it was sitting unused, and desperation had overpowered pride the night. She unlocked the door with borrowed keys and whispered apologies to the walls. If you were Nathan, standing there watching a stranger rock your nephew's crib that no longer held your nephew, what would you do? Would you protect what's yours because it's all you have left? Or would you see the echo of your own loss in the way that woman's shoulders sagged under invisible weight? Nathan felt his pulse in his ears as Sarah spoke, explaining without anger or entitlement, her words tumbling out not as excuses but as truth laid bare. She didn't ask for permission or forgiveness, only understanding, and something in the way she said she had nowhere else to go stunned him more than the fact she was there at all. The first nights were stiff and quiet, an uneasy truce where grief sat between them like a third adult. Nathan slept on the couch, listening to the baby's uneven breathing through the thin walls, remembering how Mark used to complain about those same sounds while smiling despite himself. Sarah moved through the house carefully, as if afraid to disturb ghosts, cleaning and cooking in gratitude rather than obligation. The little girl watched Nathan constantly, her eyes big and searching, as if trying to decide whether he was a threat or a promise. Hardship does strange things to time. Weeks passed in a blur of shared meals eaten in silence, of Nathan coming home from temporary work to find crayon drawings taped to the fridge, of Sarah sitting at the table late at night balancing bills with trembling hands. He learned her story in fragments, how she'd prayed in hospital hallways, how faith sometimes felt like the only thing keeping her upright, how she hated that her children would never remember their father's voice. She learned his too, how guilt can rot from the inside, how men sometimes run not because they don't care, but because they care too much and don't know how to carry it. The change was slow and almost unnoticeable at first. Nathan started fixing things that had been broken since Mark's death, the loose stair, the leaky sink, the fence that leaned like it had given up. Sarah began to laugh occasionally, surprised by the sound of it herself, especially when Caleb wrapped his tiny fingers around Nathan's thumb with absolute trust. Anna stopped hiding behind her mother and began leaving small toys near Nathan's boots, silent offerings of acceptance. Pain didn't disappear, it softened. There were nights when Sarah cried quietly in the dark, and mornings when Nathan sat alone on the porch staring at nothing, but the house no longer felt like a tomb. It felt like a place where broken people were learning how to breathe again. Nathan realized one evening, watching Sarah read a Bible story to the children, that home was not about ownership or bloodlines, but about who stayed when leaving would be easier. Winter came early that year, and with it a letter from the bank confirming Nathan could finally sell the house if he wanted. He sat at the kitchen table for a long time, the paper heavy in his hands, listening to Anna hum to herself in the other room. He thought about what he'd walked into months ago, the anger, the shock, the stunned silence after Sarah told him she was a widow with nowhere else to go. He thought about how close he'd come to choosing himself again, and how different everything felt because he hadn't. The day he told Sarah his decision, the words felt steadier than he expected. He wasn't giving the house away out of charity or obligation. He was choosing to stop running. He was choosing to let love look different than he'd imagined, quieter and less dramatic, but deeper than anything he'd known before. Sarah didn't cry or celebrate. She simply closed her eyes, relief washing over her face like a prayer answered after too long. If you were watching this story unfold from the outside, would you have believed that two separate tragedies could stitch themselves into something like family? Nathan did, eventually. He learned that coming home doesn't always mean reclaiming what you lost, but sometimes means finding what you didn't know you needed. Before the story ends, take a moment and tell us in the comments what choice you think you would have made if you were Nathan, standing in that doorway with your past and someone else's future colliding. In the end, the house held laughter again, not the same as before, but honest and hard one. Nathan stayed. Sarah healed. Two children grew up knowing safety instead of fear. And sometimes, when the light was on late at night, it wasn't because of ghosts, but because love, once given a second chance, refused to go dark again. If this story reached something tender in you, please gently like, comment, share, and subscribe, only if it truly touched your heart and reminded you that even broken beginnings can lead to beautiful second chances.